All right, Natalie, the first question is the only scripted, I promise, and then we'll go off the cuff. But how did you accidentally fall into franchising? What's your franchise backstory?
I think accidental is the right word there, which is that I got lucky enough to know somebody that worked at Comfort Keepers, and so I was brought in to Comfort Keepers, and I fell in love with franchising almost immediately.
Did you understand the complexities of the industry that Comfort Keepers is in, or did that come over time? Because obviously, most franchisees have some deep personal relationship that happened prior to getting into business. But did you understand it, or how did that come into fruition for you?
So I didn't really understand it beforehand, but I think everybody you talk to has some relationship with home care, and I am no exception to that. So home care was something that I had felt in my life with a parent in the past, but I didn't understand the piece behind it. I just understood how much of a difference it made in my family's life, which I think is quite similar for a lot of our franchisees. As you kind of mentioned, that a lot of them have something where it's touched them, and they look at it and they see the difference it can make.
As you've gone through your career and Lyft here, has your vision for the business changed, or has it always been dialed into something very similar?
Yeah, and the vision's changed a little bit. Our ownership has changed a little bit, which of course changes the dynamic there. Um, but we've always been what's been important to us is how do we support our franchisees? How do we as a brand continue to grow? How do we support our franchisees best? And that hasn't changed at all. So, as time changes, as technology changes, as industry changes, we evolve as well. But the general mission of how do we take care of our franchisees, how do we take care of our clients, how do we take care of our caregivers, all of those pieces, that remains the same.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at your timeline into Comfort Keepers or into the industry, connected, dialed into the industry, period. Like, I think the biggest thing that has changed, probably for both franchisees and the consumer, is one, obviously there's a lot of competition in the space, but what interests me is that doesn't decrease the demand. And it's almost like even with all the competition, there's still not enough to create the ultimate solve. And it's probably going to get even more not turbulent, but necessary to find solutions as a whole entire senior care community on how do we handle this giant business module that really deals with the most sensitive thing of people's lives is how do you age in place, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, it is definitely changing, but I think everyone sees the dynamic of what is happening. There's a lot of money looking at how do you help people stay home. The tough piece for where a lot of that money sits is that home care is a local business, and that's not changing. And it's why franchising is perfect with home care because this is not something where you can just throw a bunch of money at it and it's going to replace the local piece. It just doesn't. And so, it kind of situates Comfort Keepers perfectly because we've got the benefit of two things. We've got the local piece and our franchisees who really know their community and know the people, and that makes a big difference. But we also, as a whole, have a large brand. And so we kind of set ourselves up to be able to partner with some of these people that are trying to, these companies that are trying to figure out how do we help people stay in home, but that don't have the presence in the home and the local presence like we do with our franchisees.
What I love about your vision, because you said it's all around supporting your franchisees, which means from a corporate leadership standpoint, you're pinpointing your number one customer as the franchisee. For a franchisee, I would imagine their two main customers end up being caregivers and the people that they are caring for. And so, but you're not coming out and saying, my vision is how do we support all three of these audiences or partners and all the other extensions of it. You said we need to support our franchisees. Is that an accurate statement? Like you as a business leader, you've organized your focus towards how do we support them. In turn, they'll support our customers.
Yeah, I think that that's incredibly accurate. I mean, our franchisees, absolutely, you're right. It's caregivers and clients, and really, our franchisees do a phenomenal job of caring for both sets of those because they do have to make sure that the caregivers and their office staff, their employees, are well cared for because they are in turn then go care for the clients, and so those things go hand in hand. For us, yes, we are making sure that we can support our franchisees as best as possible so that they can go fulfill that mission because they are that in between there, and we want to give them all the tools in the world to be able to go do that.
From a business standpoint, I mean, if I'm a franchise buyer or I'm advising a franchise buyer, I talk about how do you go understand what the why you why now is. Like, find the point of differentiation, but beyond that, and we'll get into this, bet on the jockey, not on the horse. You bet on the people that are going to lead this widget. When I say point of differentiation, to me, if I'm extracting it, part of what you're creating is we are in the business of supporting our franchisees, which means we're in the business of fine-tuning business, which in turn should equal more support for the franchisees. But how else do you find a way to stand out in a business unit that is there's a lot of similarities among competition?
Yeah, I think our biggest differentiator for us as comfort keepers is, we talk about elevating the human spirit. And that's you'll hear that time and time again. We talk about joy. With senior care, with parents aging and that sort of thing, there's often inherently a lot of fear associated with it. And a lot of people that say, oh, you got to be careful. What happens to this with mom? Or what if this and da da da? And it becomes a very negative message. And yes, we obviously are very concerned with keeping people safe. That is definitely the primary concern, but we're also concerned with making sure that people live a fulfilled life while they continue to age in place and making sure that that message hits home and that there's so much joy that can continue on in aging and we help bring joy to all of the people we serve. That makes a big difference.
I love that. I mean, when I think about the space or study the space, I feel like a gap that is still has potential for closing ends up being the people that are right underneath their parents, meaning the children in most cases. And I say this like when I ask that question, I get goosebumps thinking about this, but I think about the way that I behave as a human. I care for my family. I care for my children. And this was like a month ago, my youngest son just said, "Hey Dad, how are you doing?" And it was such like an impactful thing. But I think about this because like for any of us that have aging parents, like whether we are vocalizing it or we're internalizing it, we are trying to come to grips of there is going to be an expiration date on this relationship with our parents on this planet. And so it's such a deep thing that very rarely the child is so consumed with making sure mom and dad are comfortable too. But everything you just said is so valuable back to me as the middle, because nobody's asking me how I'm doing in this scenario. And I think that's such a wide opportunity for the industry to start thinking about like the mental wellness of the child that has an aging parent,
Without a doubt. And a big part of that's communication too, right? Because oftentimes the child doesn't live anywhere near the parent. And that's part of the reason they need home care. And so making sure that you're regularly communicating with that child so they know that mom or dad is getting the care they need and what is happening there makes a huge difference for that child.
What keeps you up at night?
Oh, there's a lot of things that keep me up at night, including my children sometimes. No, what keeps me up at night? I worry about the regulatory piece for franchising for our franchisees. That's constantly changing in home care, and so I do worry about that piece. Luckily, what I will say, and so probably it keeps me up less and less so, is that people are more supportive of home care now than they were when I started at Comfort Keepers 10 years ago. And there was definitely an impact, I think, from the pandemic here where people said, oh, this is something that's really necessary and we need to have regulations around it to make it necessary so that people can stay home. And so I think that you see way more support for it, and that definitely helps me sleep a little better at night.
This is probably a larger philosophical question, but most licensing seems to be controlled at the state level. Is
Mhm.
that the right approach, or does it at some point does there have to? And look, franchising is at the state level too, whether how the FDD is governed. But is that something that needs to change in the future so that there is a consistency, or does it work in its favor so there is bendability, especially for a business like yours that operates over state lines?
Yeah, I mean, certainly it adds a level of complexity for us who have a national footprint. But home care is a local business, and I do think that the states oftentimes know better than the federal would as to what matters for them locally. And so I'm supportive of a lot of it being at the state level, even with the additional complexity there.
Yeah, and I think if at the state level, if whatever regulatory actions go into play, I think the opportunity, and this is for franchising and or senior care, is for those that are making some of these decisions to listen to the voices of those that are on the front lines. And so I think far too often the decision is made in franchising on regulations without talking to the franchisee and understanding how it works. And the same is probably true for senior care. There's tons of advocacy out there, but the ones on the front lines should have a voice that's included in decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and it's why different associations, like there's Home Care Association of America, and our COO has a seat on the board of it, and it's really important to stay involved in things like that, so that people are continuing to hear from the home care agencies themselves, and we can bubble up what's happening at our franchisees level, and help influence some of these pieces.
Part of our audience is going to be franchise buyers, people that are
Mhm.
looking at opportunities. What do you want them to know that maybe they can't see on a website and maybe they can't see in the media? What do you want them to know? And as an extension to that, who's your ideal candidate?
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll start with the second question first, and then that kind of helps answer the first one, which our ideal candidate has a combination of two things. They have a business sense and they want to grow a business, and are ambitious in growing a business. And at the same time, they want to make the world a little bit better of a place. And I think that that's what's unique to what we do. It's part of what I love about it. There's so many businesses out there in the world, and I've worked for some of them in the past where you go in on a day to day basis and you're like, yeah, I grew this business, but am I making actually any sort of dent in the world? Probably not. And when it comes to home care, and they've done so many different polls for seniors, and this is not just actually a phenomenon in the US, this is an international phenomenon. The overwhelming majority of seniors want to stay home. It's just a matter of whether they can. And so to be able to grow a business that fulfills what a lot of people want and brings joy in a lot of their lives, that makes a huge difference. And I want franchisees that want to make that difference too. But home care is also still a business, and they have to be business minded. You can make a good, very, very good living with this, and we have franchisees that certainly do. But it's still a business, and you've got to run it.
Yeah, I think the beauty of this category is you can, again, most likely due to a personal situation, you have some sort of understanding or passion behind this business, and
Yeah.
so that's a starting point. And if you can blend that with true business sense, because you got to figure out the complexities, because you have employment with caregivers, and how are you going to actually recruit and retain, and then how are you going to manage the customer relations on two different
Mhm.
demographics of the kid and the senior. And so it's, you still need to have that business mindset. I still think like the beauty of anything to do with franchising, especially a brand that truly supports the franchisee, which again, your opening statement revolved all around the franchisee. Well, when you leave corporate America and you go into business ownership, you're leaving a place where there are other resources. There might be someone in operations and sales and
Mhm.
marketing and HR and et cetera, et cetera. When you go into business for yourself, you look around and you might be the only one in the room. But if you zoom out and look behind you and say, okay, look at the franchisor who's behind me, if they answer that question the way that you did, that said we are in the business of supporting our franchisees, then at least I know that some of that scaffolding will help me get there. So, yeah, I mean, point is, I agree with you, and I appreciate the answer.
Well, and I think probably what's worth noting and something important that we do is it's not just us supporting our franchisees, it's our franchisees supporting each other. And how
Mhm.
do we help bring them together so that they can, we really are big on getting people together here and letting them challenge each other and support each other. And it's amazing the community that our franchisees have built also amongst each other.
If I ask you about your vision for next year, does it revolve around growth, or where does it centralize on?
It does revolve around growth. Obviously there are things beyond growth that I think about and I care about, but I'd say, when you talk about our big strategy for next year, yes, it's around growth. But it's growth in two different ways. So it's growth in terms of, I would love to see more expansion. Within for territories, I'd love to get some new franchisees in. I also would like to see our existing franchisees expand, which they're doing a lot of, which is good news. But then growth also for our existing franchisees, and that comes again back to the support. How do we support our franchisees more and more to help them grow? Because that's really their goal as well. And so, how do we help them do that?
Yeah, I mean, from my standpoint, I see it as awareness opportunities, and that's for the whole industry. If you really look at how did franchise brands in the senior care space grow, the broker community was very heavy-handed on that because they would capture someone that says, "Here's how much money I have," and they would align it to a brand. Here, when the franchisee stories continue to get lifted up, brands don't sell brands, people do. And when we hear the stories of the franchisee on what they were able to accomplish and how they've been able to grow, then that should give the fuel to ignite someone else to say, "Oh, I didn't know this was a brand in that category," because it is crowded. And so the brands have to figure out a way to lift it up. And oftentimes that's through the franchisees.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we've been super fortunate in terms of our franchisees lifting it up. We've got I would say, a very content franchise base, which is just a great place to be. And so they help sell it themselves. And so, we've got some phenomenal new franchisees that are coming in because of that.
Well, I said you bet on the jockey, not on the horse, and
Absolutely.
I feel like a broken record when I say this, but I see smiles, I see enthusiasm, and if I need to bet on someone, that's who I want to bet on. And I appreciate you sharing some of your story and some of your leadership qualities with us today.
Absolutely. Very happy to. Thank you for including me too.
Of course, for Natalie, I'm Nick. This was the Franchisor Hot Seat. Take care.